Okay. So we talked about the underpinnings of debate, we say, but really we're talking about the underpinnings of reasoning itself, about being consistent. There are different ways in which human beings metabolize information. You can metabolize it with your feelings. This makes me cry is a way of metabolizing information. It doesn't matter whether it's logical to cry or not. It's a matter of your introverted feeling. But in other matters, it does matter very much whether it's consistent. When you're engaged in argumentation, you're engaged in reasoning. Whenever you make claims, you take on a burden. A lot of people make claims that don't have any burden necessarily to fulfill except for the burden that's obviously there. If I say, I like cheese, what's my burden? Nothing. Why? Because it's assumed that because I'm me, I know best whether I like cheese or not, and that even if I don't like cheese, it's my right to identify as somebody who does, because again, that axiom about not mistaking arguments for identity. Okay? So, now that we've discussed all those underpinnings, the issue becomes, when you actually get into the argumentation mechanics, what do responses do, and how does stuff play out on the flow? So let's look at the steps, the order of operations of things that happen. First, let's have a resolution first to talk about. Let's use the Cuba resolution. So the U.S. should end the Cuba embargo. Okay, that's our resolution. Now, I may have lots of stuff in my arguments that aren't specific to the Cuban embargo, but they're going to have a link. A link refers to why the argument is appropriate to X. And sometimes it's the resolution. Any argument should link to the resolution or to the argument that links to the resolution. It always has to link back to the resolution somehow, either through something else or directly. Okay? Otherwise, why are you saying it in this debate round? It doesn't matter if it doesn't link back to the resolution ultimately. And that's another reason why we don't want to talk about identity. It doesn't matter if I'm not an expert in something. If I'm making a claim that's validated by a legitimate warrant, then you have to respond to the warrant or the impact. You can't respond to me personally. That doesn't link back to the resolution. It's non-meritus. Okay. So this is the linking is how things link back. So we're going to put here ways to attack an argument. And they're almost all attacking the link, okay? One way to attack it is to topicality. Topicality attacks the link to the res. If I say, yes, the U.S. should end the embargo against Cuba. Point one. Allowing more maple syrup from Canada will improve the U.S. economy. It may be the case that allowing more maple syrup from Canada will improve the U.S. economy. It may be the case that the U.S. economy needs that improvement. It may be the case there's very significant dollar impact. It doesn't matter. It's not a reason to end the Cuba embargo because Canada is not Cuba, and the Canadian maple syrup issue is unaffected by the end of the Cuban embargo. It's a topicality problem. Okay, it attacks
the links to the what?
To the resolution. Topicality attacks the links to the res. Now, let's say somebody makes a claim like this. Embargo worsens poverty. The claim contains the impact. Poverty is worsened. Okay? Now, the warrant might be prevents economic development by precluding foreign investment. This is an argument you might see in the Cuba topic that we're doing right now. And then the impact will be a clarification of this. And then there'll be some numbers like per capita, 6K, Now, what does this number prove? Per capita 6K means the average Cuban makes $6,000 a year.
But I thought you said the K was million.
No.
No.
K is thousand, million is mil, billion is bill. I mean, sometimes it'll be measured in thousands. If something's measured in thousands, then 6KK is 6 million. But that's not what the case here. So, which one do you want? Just ask me.
Oh, sorry. Read it.
Yeah, I'll read it.
Okay. Warren, after Warren and...
Previous?
Oh.
I'm sorry, prevents. This is an abbreviation for prevents. Prevents
Prevent, okay.
economic development by precluding foreign investment, and then the impact is down here, per capita of 6K. Prevents economic development by precluding foreign investment. It means the laws in Cuba say, no foreigners, you can't buy this building here, open a factory, and hire some of our people and pay them. You can't do that. Well, why not? Well, because we're a communist government and we own everything, and we control everything. So this impact here, per capita 6K, it does prove that they're poor, but it doesn't prove that it's worse. Down, if I would say down from 7, then I've shown it's getting worse, and this is the link by which it's getting worse according to my claim and my argument. Then I have some evidence that I would read that would prove this. That would say all this stuff. The EV is development. Prevents economic development by precluding foreign investment. I will write out the full words from now on. It's obviously not saving me any time to do otherwise. All right, so now you've got your claim, your warrant, and your impact. You can attack. You're never going to really attack the claim unless your point is there lacks a warrant. You can say, attack the claim by pointing out.
What's the word after foreign?
Investment. No warrant. Okay, you can point out that there's no warrant in the claim, but other than that, you can't really attack the claim. You can attack the warrant. You can do this. You can attack it on methodology. Just attack the claim. So methodology, bias. This is an identity thing, right? But it's an identity of the person you're citing, not the identity of you. It's a huge difference. It's not wrong because you're biased for making the argument. It's wrong because your source is biased. You are presumed to be a non-entity, a debater, somebody who is doing logic, argumentation, and can remove themselves from the argument. Note, to be removing oneself from an argument is not the same thing as to not express the argument emotionally. To express an argument emotionally is not to be motivated to express the argument by emotion. To express an argument emotionally is not to change the nature of the argument at all. It's important to note this. Okay, methodology. Bias is another critique potentially you can make. But again, of a citation, not of the person making the argument. You could critique the warrant on vagueness, that it's not specific enough to make any difference. You could critique the warrant on recency. The evidence you use is too dated. You could critique the argument on its mechanism. The mechanism you point out doesn't do the thing it does. Or you could critique the argument on its on the basis of new info. Like, well, that used to be the case, but this thing changed, now it's different. All right, so you could critique the thing on its logic. In this case, it doesn't have any bad logic per se, but it doesn't really have any logic to it. So it doesn't. You can't really do it here, but that's not the point. You could critique the link directly if, in fact, this weren't really about. If, in fact, the link were weak, it's hard to explain an example of that, but it could be a weak link that just says, the card doesn't really say it works in power like it says it says. These are all ways of attacking the warrant. Now note, what do these things look like? What can you do with it? You can turn it, counter it, ground it, mitigate it, weigh it. So if you turn it, you say you can either do an impact turn. Well, actually, we're on the warrant. A link turn says, actually, the mechanism you're describing does the opposite. Actually, embargo encourages foreign investment somehow. You can point to a law that Cuba passed saying, we are now going to start implementing this kind of foreign investment. We're going to invite foreign investors in there. It's a disingenuous turn because it's saying because the government permits some foreign investment, that's just as good as allowing it to occur naturally, which is not as good at all. But it's a turn nevertheless, whether it's disingenuous or not. You can counter it directly and say, not true. Here's why. And you have some reason why. Not true because something. You could ground it by saying, not significant because of framework reasons. Like, well, we shouldn't evaluate this on the grounds of economics. We should evaluate it on the grounds of human rights. Like, prefer other kind of impact.
Is that not true, B?
Not true, because. B/C stands for because. Alright, so you can mitigate it. You can say it's true, but weak, but weaker than he says. Or you can weigh it. It's true, but not enough to win compared to mine.
Is that not significant?
Yeah, not significant.
Because of
Because of framework, FW.
okay, framework.
It basically means if I'm saying, oh, we should choose the winning side is who best protects economic interests in Cuba versus, oh, we should choose the winning side and who best protects human rights interests, then I would say, you might be right that it helps you economically, but that's not how we should decide this round. We should decide it based on human rights, and so it doesn't matter if you're right about that or not. So that would be...
Or other kind.
Okay, so...
Is it impact?
Yes, Eric. Gah.
What's impact?
Impact. What do you mean, what's impact? It's the thing that happens.
Oh.
Alright, so now let's talk about attacking the impact. What is the impact? It's the thing that happens. So, for example, look, it's hurting the Cubans. See, their yearly income's going down. That's proof, it's hurting them. This is the impact, minus 1,000 per Cuban. To attack the impact, you can do a lot of things with it, potentially. But basically you can do any of these, mitigate, weigh, ground, counter, or turn. If you turn an impact, you say, making them poorer is good. That's called an impact turn. You can framework up. Look, it may be bad for the Cuban people, but there are some very threatened reefs outside of Cuba that are very well protected, but threatened because if the boats were allowed to go there, then they would all be dead. But they're not allowed to go there because Cuba has prevented its people from leaving the island because it's so oppressive and authoritarian. We need Cuba to remain oppressive and authoritarian to protect those reefs because those reefs, once gone, will be gone forever, whereas Cuban people can always move someplace else or do something else. We can figure that problem later, but we have to protect the reefs because that's a one or done thing. It's one chance to preserve it. If you fail to preserve it one time, it's gone forever and you have no other chance to ever preserve it. You have to preserve it consistently over time. So you might argue that kind of an impact turn. Making them poorer is good. Keep them poor and oppressed because that saves the reef. It's kind of a bad argument, but you could do that. You could say it saves the planet in general by making them, you don't want to increase consumerism and more consumption of fossil fuels, stuff like that. Those are all things here. This mitigate says, you could say, down $1,000 isn't such a big deal because they had deflation of 4% as well. So it's fine, it balances out. They have the same earning power. That'd be mitigating the impact. If you ground it, you could again say the same thing. This kind of impact, this kind of economic impact isn't relevant to the round because we're not trying to determine the impact on average people. We're trying to determine how it's going to impact the world stage or something like that. So yeah, that's basically how you attack things. Now, note, once something has been affected like this, it's been turned, for example. If I turn your impact and say, their income going down $1,000 per dollar per year is a good thing because that's the official income from the government. But the reason it's going down is because they're supplementing so much more of their income in the free market right now. They're actually making something like $20,000 a year. Only $6,000 of it is reported by the government because they're only getting $6,000 of their income from the government. The rest are getting from free enterprise. It's a good thing that they're getting poorer by the official numbers. It means things are actually getting better. Now what I have done there is I've done a sort of combo link/impact turn that would leave that point standing at that point. There's no way to respond to that. It's probably, if that were true, if I had the evidence to back it up, it would be the winning point on that argument chain. So if somebody would say, oh, it's making them poorer. And you say, well, is it making them poorer because, is your reason why it's making them poorer, your impact here is that their per capita is down from 7,000 to 6,000. Is that really the warrant? You say the impact then would be 1,000 times all of the Cuban people. But is that also the warrant for why you know that they're poorer? Yes, it's the warrant for why I know they're poorer. The statistics show us that. Okay, well then, here's the bad news for you, opponent. Those statistics show what the exact opposite of what they appear to show because the reason it's gone down is because those people have supplemented way more than $1,000 worth of income with private market income. And as a consequence, it's a sign that the Cuban economy is getting more and more healthy, that we're not getting, that people are getting less and less of their income from the government and more from private enterprise. That would win that argument chain. And then that would be what this meant from then on until or unless my argument was disputed. So until or unless that argument is disputed, even though I made it as a rebuttal, it stands on the record for the purpose of the round that Cuba's official numbers going down are a good sign of economic growth for Cuba. This warrant thing can be generalized out and say, we already know these numbers prove the opposite of what they say. Why not those numbers that you said there as well, opponent? And so it's important the status of a given argument. It may have been presented initially as a means of proving that Cubans were getting poorer. Once turned and left unanswered, that turn's left unanswered, they say, I don't know how to answer that point. I guess you're right about that, or I don't know, or they just don't say anything. Then it now no longer means what they established it to mean. It means the opposite. And you can use it then to build stuff off of. Right? It's like, let's say I've got some 2x4s and I want to build a deck because I want to build on top of the deck. I want to build a little house or something. I don't know. As long as I got 2x4s standing up here and sort of holding them, I can't begin building anything on top of the deck because they're not flat on the ground. Right? When they are flat on the ground, I can start building on it. But if they're flat on the ground and then somebody comes and lifts one up again, then the whole thing falls down and I got to start over. So, in the same way, is it the case that this turn is taking something that was building there, tipping it over, and making it flat in the other direction for you to build on it. Now, if they tip it back over again, not only is your thing collapsed that you were building on top of it, but their thing that was previously collapsed becomes uncollapsed. So, it might be the case if you have 4 different arguments in a chain that you go, I say A. Oh yeah, well I say B and that counters A. Okay, and then I also say C, which is built on B. Okay, but here I've got D, which counters B. Now B and C both collapse. And now I build something on C. Well then, D or whatever, then E happens and it turns it back again, then this thing collapses, this thing uncollapses, and you got the arguments back in the whole chain. It's a system of ons and offs, okay? That's how it works. So these are basically the ways you can attack, give an argument or respond to one. Remember, who has the burden? Who has the burden? Always. When you ask this question, you should always have the same answer. The person making the claim. Okay? They have the burden. What do they have the burden to do? What does the person making a claim have a burden to do? Substantiate that claim. Substantiate it how? With a warrant and an impact. Impact tells us why it matters. The warrant tells us how it matters. Okay. So that's it for that little section there. I think what we'll do next probably is do a little bit of review of what we've gone over so far. It's a lot of information, right? A lot of very good information. The sort of information that tastes like flavor.